group of us, and they say, hey, listen, after services this morning, it was our plan to go into downtown Greenville, and we're going to go get lunch down there, and we're going to kick around, maybe do a little shopping, maybe go down to Falls Park and spend a little time at the river. And then after we spend some time in downtown Greenville, we're going to leave there and we're going to go over to downtown Spartanburg and connect with some of our friends who live over in Spartanburg. Can you tell us the best way to get from downtown Greenville to downtown Spartanburg? Now I want you to think for a moment about how you would answer that question. Now, a couple things here we need to do away with. I know that this would never happen anymore because everybody has phones and GPS, but let's just go back to the old days, all right? And here's the second thing I need to toss out. We're not talking about woman's directions. You with me? We're talking about men's directions. You know, you ladies would say, well, you know, you need to turn right at the Burger King and then go about 8 or 9 minutes and then turn left at the Zaxby's. That's not the kind of directions we're given, okay? You see, we men use highways and we use the directions like north, south, east, west. That's what we're talking about, okay? All right, all the ladies are going to attack me after services, I know. But if you're giving instructions, how would you do it? So somebody might say, all right, well, here's what we're going to do. What you need to do, the best way to get from Greenville to Spartanburg, is you need to get on Interstate 385 in downtown Greenville, and you need to take that to Interstate 85, take that all the way into Spartanburg to Highway 56, and then Highway 56 will take you right into downtown Spartanburg. But somebody else is standing in the group and hearing you say that, and they say, what are you, nuts? You're going to send them on the interstate? 385 has been under construction for 71 years. Don't you know that they're going to run into all kinds of traffic problems over there? And on the interstate, the speed limit is 70 miles an hour. But don't you know that there's people who do 80? If you take the interstate, you're going to die. Or you're just going to at least get stuck in a traffic jam. You don't need to go the interstate. So here's what you need to do. So you're going to say what you need to do is get on Wade Hampton Boulevard, Highway 29 in downtown Greenville, and you need to take that all the way into downtown Spartanburg. And then somebody else says, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Don't you know there's 571 traffic lights between Greenville and Spartanburg on Wade Hampton? It's going to take you at least 3 hours to do that. And then somebody else joins the conversation and says, no. What you need to do, don't go the interstate. Don't go Highway 29. What you need to do, if you have the time, is take the scenic route. And so from downtown Greenville, you need to get on Highway 276, and you need to go up to Highway 25 toward Asheville, take that all the way up to Highway 11, and start making your way over to Campobello, and make sure you stop at Alan and Cherie Mosley's house and go to their backyard and pick some blueberries and get you a little snack, because this is a long trip after all. And then you're going to carry Highway 11 over to Highway 176, and then that'll take you right into downtown Spartanburg. Now, then a fourth person stands up and says, listen, it really doesn't matter. All 3 ways are going to get you to Spartanburg. Just pick one, make a decision, and go. Because at the end of the day, you're going to start in Greenville and you're going to end up in Spartanburg. So the path that you take, yes, one might take a little more time than another, but at the end of the day, it just really doesn't matter. Now, some of you have your thinking caps on this morning, and you know exactly where I'm going with this lesson, don't you? You see, this is something that we hear in religion all the time. You hear people talking about religious things say things like, well, you know, there are many paths to God. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we could choose that ultimately lead to heaven. And so you just need to pick one. Don't judge anybody else's choice. And just go on the path that you've chosen. Is that true? Are there many paths to God? You know, there's a lot of religions in the world, aren't there? There's a lot of different paths that people say bring them to God, or at least their concept of God, whatever that might be. There are a number of paths that people say will bring them to enlightenment or nirvana or some other kind of thing, some end goal that they're seeking after. And so what they say is it really doesn't matter if you choose Christianity or if you choose Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or any other kind of ism that's out there. You just need to pick a path, don't judge anybody else's choice, and then walk your path to God. Well, can we just pick any religion that suits our preferences and expect that any choice we make is going to bring us to God? Is that true? Maybe in this context you've heard people share the parable of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Have you ever heard this parable before? The blind men and the elephant? Here's how this parable goes. There were 6 blind men who stumbled upon an elephant, although they didn't know it was an elephant. And so they hear this elephant and they know that something is out there, but they're not sure what it is. And so each man walks up to the elephant and he starts touching some part of the elephant. And so you can see the men in the picture. They're touching various parts of the elephant. And so the first man touches the elephant's belly and his side. And he says, "Oh, this is like a broad wall. I'm pushing up against some kind of building or something." And a second man is pulling on the elephant's tail. And he says, "This is like a rope that I'm touching." And the third man has his arms around an elephant's leg, and he says, "Wow, this feels like the trunk of a tree. I'm touching a tree. That's what this is." And the fourth man is touching the elephant's trunk, and he says, "Boy, this is like a snake. I think I'm holding on to a snake." And the fifth man is touching the elephant's ear, and he says, "This is like a fan that you would use. This is like a palm branch." And the sixth man touching the elephant's tusk, he said, No, this is a spear. That's what we're all touching. It's sharp and hard. It's got a pointed tip. This is a spear. And so the point that people will make is that each man's blindness prevented him from seeing the whole picture. And so none of us can claim that any particular religion is the true one, is the right one. Because after all, we're just like each one of these blind men. We're touching one portion of the elephant, but we can't see the entire picture. And I just want to leave that illustration seated right here, and I'm going to come back to it at the end of our lesson, okay? But I want to consider with us this morning this idea of many roads, many paths leading to God. So let's ask this question. Where does this idea come from? This idea that religious people say that there are many roads to God. Where does that come from? Well, let me suggest, number one, that it comes from our pluralistic society. Our country, the United States of America in particular, but I suppose many countries are like this. Our country is a melting pot of different cultures and ethnicities and religious traditions, isn't it? And because of that, we are all more aware of other religions and other faiths that exist. Perhaps more so now than we have ever been in history. Those of you who are older, how many Muslims did you go to school with? How many Hindu people? How many Buddhists did you go to school with? Now, I don't know about your experience. I'll tell you in a moment about my own. But my suspicion is that for most of you, the answer to that question is this right here. You probably didn't go to school with any Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists. Now, maybe some of you went to school with one or two or something like that. But by and large, I don't think most people who are older had that experience. But it's not that way with kids today. In fact, even with me in my school age years, I went to school with 2 Hindu kids. One of them was actually a really close friend of mine. But I don't remember any Muslim kids or any Buddhist kids. I don't remember kids other than those 2 Hindu kids in a school of 1,500 I don't remember any other kids who were of other religions and other world faiths. But now it's different. You may have coworkers or neighbors that follow some other world religion. Your kids may play ball with kids from the Middle East or from the Orient, and it's just a different world that we live in now because of things like immigration and people coming over from job transfers and things like that. And understand, I'm not putting that down at all. But what I'm saying is we are just more aware in our world today that there are other people out there who have other religious beliefs than me. I'll tell you when my awareness of other world religions began. My awareness of other world religions, particularly the religion of Islam, began on September 11th, 2001. I was 13 years old at the time. Everybody stop, take a deep breath, gasp. I was almost 14 years old when September 11th happened, and I remember everything about that day, as I'm sure you do too, if you were old enough to remember that. But I'm not sure I ever knew of some religion called Islam before that day. And as my close Hindu friend's family was very quick to tell me in the days following September the 11th, the people that they're talking about on the news, Islam, that's not us, he would tell me. We're Hindu. We're different. That's not us. Don't associate us with them because of the color of our skin. Our religion is different than theirs. And I remember his dad sitting down with me on the couch and talking to me about the differences in Hinduism and Islam. But all I'm saying in this is with our pluralist society, we have a greater awareness of all these religions that are in existence in the world today, perhaps more so than we've ever had in the past. But combined with that, secondly, our postmodern and our very tolerant society that we have today. Some scholars have said that we live in a post-truth world. And what they mean by that is that not everybody believes in absolute truth anymore. It used to be that people agreed that you had black things and white things, that there was truth and there was falsehood, that there was black and white, there was cut and dry, and now it seems that we want to dabble in the gray areas all the time. Well, I'm not so sure I can come out and say that this thing is wrong. If it's true for you, it's not true for me, but if it's true for you, I'm okay with that. That's your truth and I have my truth. And as we live in this postmodern world, when it comes to world religions, how can anybody say that somebody else's religion is wrong? Because after all, we're just like those blind men grasping and trying to make sense out of the elephant. And so everybody can have his truth or her truth, and it's wrong for us to try to persuade them that what they believe is wrong. We shouldn't do that. Charles Templeton, does that name ring a bell for some of you? He was a very famous evangelist who used to work a lot with Billy Graham. He was a very famous evangelist, but he became an atheist later in life. And he wrote a book explaining his descent into atheism. And he said regarding the claims of Christianity to be the only true religion, quote, "It is such an insufferable presumption." And so here's a man who used to preach that Christianity was the one true religion. And now at the end of his life, he says it's an insufferable presumption. How arrogant of Christians to make that kind of claim. Folks, this is one of the things that in our world today makes you and me the most obnoxious people on earth. To say that there is something called absolute objective truth. That there is something that God has defined. And it is defined for us in the Bible. And we can read in the Bible and know what is right and what is true. And everything opposed to that is wrong. And people look at us and they say, "You are intolerant bigots. Shame on you for being hateful. Shame on you for telling other people that they are wrong." An insufferable presumption indeed. And then people tell us, all religions are the same anyways. All religions are the same anyways, they tell us. It's pretty simple, right? All religions have some basic similarities. There's a deity who is to be worshipped or who is to be sought after. And that deity has given some moral and ethical codes and guidelines that we need to adhere to. And thirdly, there is some kind of afterlife in some blissful paradise for those who follow the code. That's what all religions are all about, right? And so they're all basically the same. And add to that Muslim neighbor that you have. You've talked to him a few times. He's a really nice guy. You've had a barbecue with him. He's been in your home. You've been in his home. Or that kid that your child plays ball with who's Hindu. They're really nice people. And so what we do is we take all religions and we reduce it down to morality and to an ethical code. And we say, as long as everybody's trying to be good people, then their religion is valid. Then their faith system is valid. All religions seem the same. But folks, what I want to submit to you about that point in particular is that while there are some superficial similarities, perhaps across all world religions, what we need to pay attention to is not the similarities. What we need to be paying attention to is the differences between the two. It is not true that all world religions involve some high-in-the-sky deity. That's not true. It is not true that all world religions involve some blissful, eternal paradise at the end of the journey. That is not true. There are other things that differentiate between the world religions. If there weren't, there wouldn't be different world religions, would there? So we need to be paying attention to the things that make them different, not the things that make them the same. But here's where this comes from. This idea that there are many paths to God. It comes from these things right here. And to cap this off, I didn't put this on the screen, but to cap it off, we say in our world today, well, you know what? As long as people are sincere, then that has to count for something, right? How can you tell somebody who's sincere that what they're believing is wrong? That what they believe is untrue? How can you do that and question that? But folks, as Christians, of course, what we need to do is we need to be asking, what does the Bible say? What do the Scriptures say about all this? What does Christianity claim about this idea of many paths to God? So let's start with this. What did Jesus say about that? I had you open to Matthew chapter 7. Look with me at Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14 beginning. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, "Enter through the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it." So just start with that foundational principle that Jesus gives. The way that leads to life is narrow, and there are few, relatively speaking now, understand, there are few who find it. I don't think Jesus is saying there that when you and I get to heaven, there's only going to be like 19 other people there. I don't think that's what he means. But he's saying in proportion to all of the people who have ever lived on the face of the earth, billions and billions of people, there are few who find the way to life. Now add to this verse 21. Where Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" Oops, knocked off my microphone. Sorry about that. My apologies. Everybody thought there was thunder outside. Sorry. All right. Look at what Jesus says here. He says there will be many people, many religious people, by the way, and narrow it down even further. Many religious people who call Jesus Lord. He says many of them will stand before me in the judgment day, and I will say to them, depart from me, I never knew you. Jesus is not even talking about people of other world religions here. He's talking about people who are giving allegiance to Him. And He says not even all of them are going to make it. Jesus makes it very clear to us that there will be many religious people who stand before Him in the day of judgment who find out they are not going to make it to God. Now let's add another passage to this. Look at John chapter 14 and verse 6. John 14 and verse 6. This was the passage that Matthew read for us in our scripture reading this morning. John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus says to Thomas, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, does that sound like an exclusive claim or an inclusive claim? That sounds pretty exclusive, doesn't it? Jesus says if you want to get to God, you've got to come through me. He doesn't say anything about other world religions and other prophets and other wise sages and teachers. If you want to get to God, you have to come through me. I am the truth. I am the way. I am the life. So that's what Jesus says. What do the apostles say? Let's look at some passages written by the pens of the apostles. Look at Acts chapter 4. We talked about this in our Bible class this morning. Acts chapter 4, when Peter and John are standing before the Jewish council giving a defense of their miracles and their ministry, Peter says in Acts chapter 4 and verse 10, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ the Nazarene, whom you crucified, God has raised from the dead. By this name, this man stands here before you in good health. He is the stone which was rejected by you, the builders, but which became the chief cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved. Notice what Peter does not say. He says, okay, Jewish Sanhedrin, you're following Judaism, and that's a valid world religion. And we believe in Jesus, but it's okay if you don't. You just be sincere about what you believe in Judaism, and everything's going to work out fine for you. That is not what Peter says. He says there is no other name, there is no other authority to which you can appeal to be saved. Pretty exclusive claim that the apostles are making. Look in the next book of the Bible, Romans. Acts, then Romans. Go to chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, and notice what the Apostle Paul has to say about this. Romans 1 verse 16. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the power to save people from their sins. Not some other world religion. Not some other system of faith. Look at Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10 and verse 13. For whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on Him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in Him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? How will they preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news of good things. However, they did not all obey the gospel. Paul says there is the imperative that people will go out preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, and people must obey it if they want to be saved, if they want to be right with God. Christianity does not, for even a moment, let us believe that people can just believe whatever they want to believe, and that somehow God's going to make it all work out in the end. Jesus made exclusive claims that eliminate all other systems of religion from being true. Jesus claimed to be deity, to be the Son of the living God. Folks, that's more than Muhammad can claim. He was just a man like you and me. That's more than Buddha can claim. Just a man like you and me. But Jesus was not just a man, was he? He claimed to be the Son of God, and he proved it with public miracles. Jesus supported those claims by going out and performing miracles before hundreds and even thousands of people. These were not isolated experiences that were his and his alone, and it happened off in a cave somewhere that nobody else could attest to. And so when Peter stood up in Jerusalem to preach to the Jews in Acts chapter 2, he said that Jesus was a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, just as you yourselves know. You saw the miracles Jesus performed, he told them, and you can't deny the things that Jesus did. Christianity does not give any credence at all to this idea that just any path we choose is going to get us to God. But I'm going to suggest to you that there are some serious consequences to this idea. If there are truly many paths to God, if that's true, that we can just choose any world religion we want, and we can just follow any path that we want, because after all religions are the same anyways, there are some serious consequences if that's true. Consequences regarding Christianity. If this is true, then number one, Jesus and the Bible are wrong and fraudulent. Think about that. You might as well throw out the Bible and don't pay any attention at all to anything Jesus says, because as we've seen already, Jesus and the apostles say they are the only way to God. And if that's not true, and if in fact there are many ways that we can get to God, then Jesus was either lying or he didn't know what he was talking about. And in which case, he's not who he claimed to be. Jesus didn't know what he was talking about, and the Bible doesn't know what it's talking about either. And if you can't trust what the Bible says about Jesus being the only way, well then what else in the Bible is wrong? Husbands, love your wives. I don't have to do that. I don't have to love my wife because, the Bible was wrong about that salvation thing. And if it's wrong about that, maybe it's wrong about me loving my wife. You see where this could go? If you can't trust one claim in the Bible, you can't trust any of them. If one of them is wrong, then how do you know that all of them are not wrong? You might as well say, some great teacher Jesus was. He obviously didn't know what he was talking about, or else he was lying to all of us, in which case, I don't want to be following that anyways. Throw out the Bible, do away with Jesus. If the Bible is wrong and there are many paths to God, just throw the whole thing out, folks. Now here's a second consequence. If there truly are many paths to God, then Jesus' death was unnecessary and his resurrection is ultimately meaningless. Turn in your Bible to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26. Do you remember when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane? The night that he is betrayed and the night that he is arrested. And he's there in the Garden of Gethsemane with the disciples, and he prayed to God 3 times. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Verses 39, 42, and 44. Verse 44 says he prayed again a 3rd time, saying the same thing once more. I want you to think about what's happening here. Jesus is sweating intensely. Tears are streaming down his cheeks. He is wrestling with what he is about to face. He is struggling with what he is about to go through because this is hard. The human side of Jesus is struggling with what he is about to experience, and he is pleading, God, if there is another way, let that be the case. Let it happen. I want you to think about this. If just any religion leads us to God, then God is listening to the prayers of his Son, knowing full well, actually, son, there are other ways that men can get to me. There are other truths out there that people can use to get to me. But I'm going to make you go through this anyways. compassionate God would that be? If there's another way, let it be possible. And God says, no, I'm going to make you go through with it anyways, only to discover later, when men become educated and enlightened, that there actually are other paths. What about the resurrection? Look at Romans chapter 1 again. Romans chapter 1 and verse 4. Paul begins his letter to the Romans by talking about the resurrection. And notice what he says here. Romans 1 and verse 4, speaking about Jesus, who was declared the Son of God with power. Well, how was Jesus declared to be the Son of God with power? By the resurrection from the dead. It was the resurrection of Jesus from the grave that proved that He really was the Son of God. But if there are many paths to God, then ultimately Jesus' resurrection doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything to set Him apart from other teachers and other good and wise men who proclaim to be enlightened and who set forth their systems of religion. The resurrection does nothing to differentiate Jesus from them if this claim is actually true. You see that? Now here's the third thing. If this claim is true, then converting people to Jesus is an absolute waste of time. Look in your Bible to Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. There's literally dozens of passages in Acts we could look at to make this point. But the Apostle Paul traveled widely and he went from city to city. And when he got to different cities, he would go usually into the synagogues of the Jews. And he would try to preach to them there. And so in Acts 17 and verse 1, it says, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, saying, this Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ. But if there are many ways to God, and if paganism is one of those ways, why would Paul ever go and preach to Gentiles and convince them that they need to believe in Jesus? After all, you can just be a pagan and you can find your way to God because that's an equally valid world religion, right? Or why, as in this case, would Paul go to the synagogues of the Jews and try to convince them to come out of Judaism and into Christianity if, after all, Judaism is just as valid a faith as the gospel that Paul is proclaiming? You see, it's a waste of time. Why would Paul go to all of the effort to travel, spending that time and energy and effort, and then die as a martyr for a cause that's really no greater than any other? You see the problems with this concept? Don't let anybody tell you, folks, that all religions are the same. That Christianity is just one of many different choices we can make, and that really it's all just like ice cream. You know, we got chocolate, and you got vanilla, and strawberry, and butter pecan, and moose tracks, but at the end of the day, it's all just ice cream, and it feels really good in our tummy. No, don't let anybody say that to you, okay? That is not true at all. So as we bring our lesson to a close, can I, as I told you I would, can I jump back to that illustration about the 6 blind men and the elephant? You know, maybe you've been thinking about that a little bit. You said, hey, you know what? That sounds pretty good. And you know what, you teenagers, when you get into college, you're probably going to hear this from a professor. I did. I heard this from a professor in my sociology of religion courses. You can't go around saying one religion's better than the other because after all, we're just like those blind men fumbling around trying to make sense of that elephant. There is a critical problem with this parable. And I want you to put this in your pocket, young people, so you can take this to your courses, and when your professors say this, you can say, excuse me, sir, I know how to answer that. Here is the critical flaw with this parable, this illustration. I'm going to ask it in the form of a question. What is the perspective of the guy narrating the parable? I'm going to let that question sit there for just a moment and let you think about that. Do you see why that's important? The guy narrating the parable, he knows it's an elephant. He's able to sit back and see the whole thing. He's not fumbling around pulling on the tail trying to make sense of the tail. He's not putting his arms around the elephant's legs trying to think it's a tree trunk. He's got the whole thing in sight, doesn't he? You know, if you were to see a narrator like this who can legitimately say, that's an elephant. I know it's an elephant because I know what an elephant looks like. It sure seems to me that the narrator is all-knowing and all-wise, doesn't it? He has the knowledge that all those blind men don't have. You know, the narrator sure seems to fit the place of God here, doesn't he? Because he is able to objectively look at the elephant and call it what it is, while all those blind fools are down there fumbling around. So here's the problem. The pluralist, all religions are the same. You can't judge any other religion saying yours is better. The pluralist says that everybody else is blind, but that he himself has the truth. He himself is so perceptive that he knows, well, after all, you know, all those blind men, they're fumbling around trying to figure out, but they don't know that it's an elephant, but I do. I'm able to say all world religions are equally valid because I can see the whole elephant. And so the pluralist is claiming to know and possess the one thing that the parable denies, the truth. So what has God said? He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's what Jesus said. And he supported that claim with evidence. And so the New Testament tells us that if we want to get to God, and if we want to get to heaven to be with God, we've got to go through Jesus. And we've got to be in Jesus. And the New Testament tells us how to do that. By being baptized into Christ. Romans chapter 6 and verse 3 tells us. So this morning, if you're not a Christian, you need to get into Christ. And you do that by repenting of your sins, confessing your faith in Jesus as the Son of God, and being baptized into the body of Christ, rising up to walk in newness of life. If we can help you this morning, we invite you, please come as we stand and sing together.